Welcome, Hayden Crawford, to Straight to the Source. It's so good to have you here.
It's lovely
And
to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it,
oh,
Tim.
no,
Thank you.
we had such a great experience on your podcast, and when you reached out to us and interviewed both Elise and I, that it was like just a no-brainer to have you on very early on when we launched Straight to the Source. So we're really grateful to have you here today and just to lean into your story and to find out about your journey, where you've come from, what's got you doing what you're doing now. You're doing some really fascinating stuff. I love your book, Starseed Ascension Guide. I really love the name of that, and I've got to read it at some point and get off my ass. I'm just too busy really reading Billy Carson at the moment, but yeah, you're doing some amazing things in the world and you've had some amazing guests on your podcast. So I really wanted to open it up to you just to share now about what you're doing, what you're putting into the world, what that looks like, sounds like, and yeah, give us a snapshot.
Okay, so I'm hosting two podcasts at the moment, and the one is called Cosmic Conversations, where I tend to interview people that have had interesting metaphysical stories. So people that are bilocating, or people that are that have been abducted, or people with wisdom on ancient technologies or civilizations, and people have had like near death experiences, all sorts of stuff really. So it's called Cosmic Conversations. It's quite broad at the moment, but I'm feeling it's evolving that it's going to become more and more focused around the reunion with our cosmic families, and more about the really interesting experiences that people are already having, tapping into their multidimensional aspects of self, because there's a part of that I think that hasn't been fully explored yet. And it's interesting because that goes right back for me as well. I remember when I graduated from the Kent Institute of Art and Design. I did a time-based media degree. I got a job in tabloid TV at Live TV, the Mirror Group's newspaper, and I was put on a show called The Y Files, where I was telephoning people that had encounters with extraterrestrials by default. So it's almost taken me back to that. And I always found that really interesting. But, I was like, I was always in reverence of what these people were saying to me. I never really fully believed what they were saying. But always, or the way they were saying these stories to me was blowing my mind. So it's like a return to something that has always been there, and that I've always been guided to do. So that's Cosmic Conversations. And the other podcast that I'm hosting is the Numerology Show, because obviously that's one of my other passions as well. And the Numerology Show interviews leading numerology authors from all across the world, but also, people that are doing really, really well on other platforms like TikTok. And they are starting to reintroduce numerology in a very new way onto the earth. And I think a lot of this is great because it's not just by sort of Pythagorean principles. It's all sorts of other new forms, like mixing cosmology with numerology, or looking at compound numbers and all of this sort of stuff. So I'm learning so much as I'm hosting both of those podcasts, and so it's helping me to level up as well with the people that I'm connecting with. So that's like a major part of my focus at the moment, but also building a community called the Oversoul Codex Collective, which is a platform where I get people together, mainly starseeds and cosmic wanderers or truth seekers from all over the world. And we get together every month, and we have like meditations and activations, and we speak about what's going on and support each other. Because what I've found, the biggest issue that I've had is I've become very much a hermit over the last couple of years, and I've struggled to find my soul group. So it's helped me to formulate a group that not only I feel safe with, but also that they feel comfortable with as well. And they're kind of taking their wisdom to the next level, because the exploration of the oversoul is so essential right now, because a lot of people don't even understand what it really is, including myself. So it's just been fascinating to bring these groups together, and not as me being a guru or anything like that, but just to share a space where people feel comfortable to share their experiences, and just share their wisdom. So and I just think that's what's needed right now. It's providing a space or facilitating a space.
Yes, awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So the other, sort of aspect of all of this is that, I wrote a book called the Starseed Ascension Guide, which you mentioned. That actually details my own personal journey. So it's a bit like an autobiography, but it takes people through the spectrum of colors. So I'm a color therapist as well. And the system that I work with is called the color mirrors. So it's a numerology
Yes.
based color therapy system. So the book that I wrote, I wanted to share the psychological and analytical meanings of colors through my own journey. So it takes right back into like how I was born, as a beta generation indigo back in 1972, and how I had to go through my own, rites of passage and initiations in able to shed this old sort of version of me that was trying to fit in. And I think that that's something that I had to like shed identities constantly over the years. I've had to like keep on releasing old versions of me to be able to fully step into what I'm doing now. So the old constructs, fitting into the mainstream and moving from like a fear-based narrative to feeling completely free and living in faith.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I feel like, that really draws into focus the two timelines playing out right now. Are we going to choose fear or are we going to choose love? Like there's really you see it playing out all around, right? The people who are choosing the different timelines, and one's trust and one is distrust. And yeah, it's fascinating. I love to hear what you're doing. I think that's really amazing. So, what kind of people kind of come to your group, the Codex you were mentioning?
So it's interesting because I do tend to attract a certain type of starseed, I suppose. They are normally mature, and then they are normally what I call the 2911s, So they are in numerology the ones that have had the hardest paths, the ones that have
Yeah.
experienced the most issues of separation, or they've
Yes.
attracted people with narcissistic personality disorder and they've completely broken them down and they've had to rebuild themselves. And so a lot of them are that old school, sort of, or that older generation where they didn't even know that it was a possibility for them to become sovereign. And,
Yeah.
so it's a bit more challenging for them to lose their old story and step fully into, being fully empowered. So,
Yeah.
and I'm not entirely sure why I tend to attract, that demographic, but I feel really comfortable, sort of being there because I've always been a really sensitive person. I've always been really intuitive and empathic, and even as a kid, I remember, like connecting with old people. I used to run up to old ladies in the high street and kiss the back of their hands because I was like, I've always liked the older generations, and
Yeah.
but it's not all they're not all sort of elderly. But they just seem to emit a genuinely sort of sensitive energy themselves. So I kind of maybe I attract empaths. I'm not sure. Other empaths and or people that have got huge potential of tapping into their psychic abilities and their clairvoyance.
Yeah.
And often, they're living in that sort of survival mode, and I help take them from feeling stuck in survival, work through, the old trauma, the childhood trauma. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I love that, and I feel like we come in with the soul contract of and a resonance of those who are drawn to be a part of our divine purpose as much as you're a part of theirs. So beautiful to kind of hear that honoring of that expression in the world for you and these people that are drawn to you to learn and grow into themselves, their truth, right? It's just we're just remembering, we're just helping people to remember.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, it is. It is about remembering, isn't it? And I'm always very truthful with them about what I've experienced, and I haven't got all the answers. So over the last few years, Mark and I, my husband, we both run these retreats that we get people together with, and we take them through a journey. And actually, it's been the same group of ladies that have attended all of the retreats. So we've actually got, quite a small face-to-face tribe, but they know who we are, like as a couple, and they know that we have our faults as well, and that's why
Yeah.
they feel that they can just be themselves. So on our retreats, it's not like, oh well, everyone has to drink nut milk and sort of sing kumbaya. Like, we drink wine, we swear,
Yeah.
it's pretty human really in a lot of cases, and
Yeah.
we're not pretending to be anything other than who we are. And we have a right laugh, but we cry a lot as well and scream and
Yeah. 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 It's authentic and vulnerable, authentic, real. I just wanted to honor that, because I think that's something that is very easy to get lost in this industry, is the putting up the facades and having all the answers. And I think that's a slippery slope. So I really love the fact that you're saying, this is who we are, this is us. We don't have all the answers, but we're on this path and we're going this way. Would you like to come this way with us? you know, and maybe have a glass of wine on the way.
That's it, and it's been enjoyable to go through that process, but it's not something that we are necessarily planning on continuing over the next few years. It's like, it's been great to experience it, and but like, when you feel sometimes that something's played its course, and it's like you've done that
Yeah.
bit, and now I
Yeah.
don't necessarily see that. I just got this feeling from the last retreat that we ran that that was it. I'm like, I've done that now, and it's been great, but I feel now it's more about being present, and not having to prove. I've gone through that phase of feeling like I need to prove anything. Letting go of old identities has been really important. Staying present and being in alignment, so not just doing things because I feel like I have to do things, because that takes me
Yeah.
back into the old energy of when I used to work in corporate IT recruitment. So
Yeah.
like, when I graduated from the Kent Institute of Art and Design, I ended up moving to London. And as I said, I worked in tabloid TV, but I was only in that for 2 years before I had my first sort of mini midlife awakening sort of thing. And that's when I actually moved back up to Middlesbrough, which is where my parents lived. And when I got
Yeah.
back, but I found that they were separating. My mum decided she'd go and live in Australia, and my dad stayed in Middlesbrough. So I, was just in that sort of transitional phase of my own life and trying to cling on to something that felt real. And I booked a working holiday visa to Australia, and ended up overstaying my visa here, and I was banned for 3 years. But during that process, I was having to really start crawling before I could then eventually walk and then finally run. So it was part of that, my initiation into being independent, I suppose. But it happened quite late on
Yeah.
in life for me. I was 27.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was
Oof.
quite a difficult time. And of course, when I left Australia, I then went back to the UK, to Durham, when my sister was living. And I started getting really into smoking pot again. So I used to smoke a lot of pot at uni. Probably got addicted to it, to be fair. And I used to love it. But I started not enjoying it because I started getting paranoid, so I stopped. But I got back into it when I was in Durham, and I was like, oh no, slippery slope. And so, as soon as I could, I jumped on a plane and went off to become a holiday rep over in Greece, in Halkidiki. And
Yeah.
then I got involved in a really bad relationship with a narcissistic guy who really depleted my confidence. And, he even got really quite violent with me at some points as well, and stripped me back to being like nothing again. And so I wasn't planning on going back and doing another season anywhere, but there was a place that opened up in Madeira, and one of the ladies that I'd met when I was over in Greece, she was called Eleanor Starr, and she was a guest, and she said, "Oh, I used to work as a rep for First Choice in Madeira. You should go there. It's amazing." So I just followed the breadcrumbs, along the way to figure out what I was supposed to be doing with myself. And I ended up in Madeira, and that's where I met Mark, my husband. So and I at first when I met Mark, I wasn't even sure whether he was the right person for me. We took a while for me to fall in love, but where there was that soul recognition because we're both born on the same day. So we've both got the 16th of October birthday, and we were like, yeah, okay, so we're recognizing the synchronicities here. He
Yeah.
knew straight away. And so the Madeira, thing was where it was like you and Elise, when you two found each other at the Cosmic Consciousness Conference. That's where Mark and I met
Yes.
in was in Madeira, and everything
Yes.
changed when we met. That's when I let go a lot of my old victim mentality, and life is happening to me instead of life is happening for me. And it was just a time where I felt like I could breathe again because I felt like I was understood and I was fully supported by somebody that I knew I was going to meet. I always knew I was going to meet this person, that was going to be very
Yeah.
similar to me. I don't know how or when it was going to happen, but it's
Yes.
it's it was then that it did.
Wow. Well, I love that, and it's interesting, even talking to, the smoking side of things, how easy it is to lean into those kinds of coping mechanisms when we're young, and we're not quite ready to lean into whatever's there that we're trying to, cover over. But I love the synchronicities that led you to Mark as well. Like, I think they're always there. It's as we open up more and more to spirit, like that, we just get to really acknowledge them a lot more. So I appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to and just rewind right back. Let's go right back to little Hayden. Did you say Middlesbrough? Is that where you grew up?
Yeah, so it was near Middlesbrough. Well, I was brought up in the country, so in a little village called Potto in Cleveland. I was born in Gisborough, and then yeah, we our first house that we had was in Hutton Rugby, and then we moved to this lovely rural. It was like a farmhouse, and so I had a beautiful
Yes.
childhood. I really did. My dad was from Hertfordshire, my mum was from Middlesbrough, and I had a beautiful school. Walton Parochial. It was a Christian school, so I was brought up believing in Jesus, and but I never really went to church or anything. But I always felt a connection to Jesus. I always felt like
Yes.
he was there, like walking the path with me. And but I always felt like I never fit in, ever since a very, very young child, I always felt like I was the outsider looking in. I was deeply sensitive. I used to hear like voices in my head when I would be in my room on my own. I was thinking about this morning, and I used to play in my bedroom a lot. It was like a
Yes.
converted farmhouse that used to be three cottages, and my bedroom was in the middle cottage upstairs. And there was funny energy in that room, and I think that somebody had either committed suicide in there or something had gone on. But I could
Yes.
hear voices and I had to, as soon as I started hearing them, I'd be like, just get out of the room, get out of the room and go into another room because then those voices would stop. And so I knew something was different about me. And also I used to have I must have been coming out of my body, and I remember going down the stairs and being close to the ceiling. So I would be astral
Yes.
traveling without even knowing what was going on. But then I would shut
Yes.
down all of that, like pretend it wasn't really
Mm.
happening because it wasn't spoken about or it wasn't logical.
Yes.
So I was very sensitive, and I always felt like the third wheel, So I in my book, the Starseed Ascension guide, I liken my life as being like the books that I used to read as a child. Like we had books called Roger Red Hat, Billy Blue Hat, and Johnny and Jennifer Yellow Hat, and they lived in a village with three corners. So the village that I lived in almost had three corners as well because there was me, Carl and Paul, who were like my friends, and they both
Yes.
had sisters as well. So it was me and my sister, and then them. And so it was very similar. I used to think I was Roger Red Hat because even our house had a red roof as well. And but as I sort of went through my primary school, I found that Carl and Paul became really good friends, and I was always the one that was left out. So that almost set me up from a very early age. Was always feeling like I was not wanted or people didn't like me or that I wasn't included. And I think that that probably was a really important part of who I became, because I had to almost not feel like I belonged to in order for me to do this work. I don't know, like I
Yes.
feel like I had to be that outsider.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. What do you feel was like, what's the right word? That disparity between you and the world, how did that present for you as a young person? Like, was it how you felt or acted, or like what was the
Yeah,
foundation for that? And
I felt like I just felt different from everybody else around me. I just felt like I was just didn't have the same interests, and of course, a lot of that I realized in my teens was to do with my sexuality, because, I had to go through that whole, coming out of the closet. But I was quite blessed with that as well, because my sister and I came out to my parents at the same time, because I didn't even realize my sister was gay as well. So,
yes,
but, until I knew that, I was really struggling with thinking there was something wrong with me. Like, why was I attracted to boys rather than girls? And my that sensitivity that came alongside of that as well. And I
yes,
think about the stuff that my parents used to let me do when I was growing up. It's like bizarre. Because I was I used to like performing and on stage,
yes.
so I was like a bit of a child prodigy, where I'd be like doing all these impressions on stage. My parents used to be absolutely pissing themselves laughing when they were, then I'd be dressed up as Kate Bush, so I'd be in a pink tutu with a black curly wig on, and I'd be going, wow, it's unbelievable, and all of this sort of stuff. And then Keith Harrison Orville and Barbara Woodhouse and like Margaret Thatcher and David Bellamy. And I was doing all these like impressions. And of course, they used to think it was hilarious. So, I frequently used to find myself like like getting dressed up in my grand's clothes, or like we had a clothes box, and Becky used to like getting dressed up as a bloke or a monster. so, so we were like really obscure kids, but there was no holds barred,
Yeah,
like my family was so
yeah,
liberal. They didn't judge us
yeah,
they just wanted us to make them laugh, I think.
yeah. Yeah, I love that too. It's so interesting, isn't it, when you're saying you have, this is who you are, and it's, and because it is pushing up against like essentially the indoctrination of what normal is, especially probably when you were a child, like, back then things were way more conservative than they are now. And so I feel like, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that it's very easy to do that, especially against the backdrop of quote unquote normal life, right?
Yeah, yeah, but it set me up for being bullied though as well, you see, because obviously,
Mm,
I remember there was kids at the school that put salt and pepper in the wigs I'd take into school, like in my PE bag, and they'd be really nasty, and like so I was always felt like what I was doing was sort of wrong, so I carried a lot of
yeah,
guilt
yeah,
as well with me. So I had a lot of guilt and a lot of shame that came out a lot later on as well,
yeah,
when I went through my second awakening, my magenta awakening, I call it. It's like a rite of passage
yes,
into recognizing my Andromedan lineage. And
yes,
there was that whole, all the guilt, all the grief, all the shame had to come to the surface. I remember you telling me that you had that and you got shingles. For me, it
hmm,
manifested with my mouth. It was like all my wisdom teeth had to come out at the same time. There was four, and they were all impacted. And it was when I first got to
wow.
Australia, and there was something went wrong with the operation. I think I got dry socket, so I
Oh,
was
oh
told.
no, that is horrible. That
Yeah.
is like next level. My ex partner had dry socket and she was in agony.
Was horrible. It was really horrible. It was just like, and I know it was because I wasn't talking about how I was feeling. I was in IT recruitment. I did that for 15
Yeah,
years. So I've worked in lots of industries, so I've did the whole
yeah,
repping thing. I worked in TV. I worked in hospitality. I worked in IT recruitment for 15 years, and I became a business manager, for this international IT recruitment company. But I knew I was living someone else's life. I was doing really well because I'm a very adaptable person. Like, I was making loads
yeah,
of money, and it got me stuck in it. And of course, we just
yeah,
emigrated to Australia, and we were like trying to build houses, to be able to, secure our financial security. We were going about it the wrong way, I
Yeah.
think, looking back. But I was stuck in this like living someone else's life. And because I was scared to really say, look, I think I just want to go and read tarot cards behind a curtain in a spiritual shop, I was like, I kept it all in. And when the teeth all came out and all that sort of happened, it was the trigger, I think, for the guilt and shame to be allowed to come to the surface of like all the horrible, like all the awful things I was doing in my teens and twenties. I was so lost. I was so lost, and I was completely off the rails at some points. Like I don't even know how I'm still alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, and wow, yeah, there's a lot of resonance between what you're saying and my journey, but I also wanted to just kind of lean into a little bit of what feels right for you anyway, of that truth, right? Because the off the rails part of the journey of what we go through, I feel like it's so important, right? It's like such an integral part of what we build and create from that. And even the people who can resonate with us because of we have that capacity for compassion and empathy. But what were the how did that present in the world when that lost part of yourself was expressing? What were the kind of situations, behaviors? If totally up to you where you go with
Escapism.
that, but
Yeah, no, it was like
mm,
for me, it was a pure escapism. And I just I was searching for love external to myself. And I think I was playing out a narrative where I was wanting to be like dominated so that I could finally find my own power. So I was almost like playing out submissive control dramas. I was giving my power away constantly. I wasn't setting any boundaries. It was like everything that I was doing was trying to prove to myself that I was right, that I was less than everybody else, and that they
right,
knew more. And of course, there was, I know now, of course, like none of that is true, but I had to
yeah,
go through that process. I had to learn through my own experiences. As a day number seven, I'm a 16/7 as well, which is the tower, in traditional tarot, which is learning through everything breaking down around you. So I know now that that's how I learn. You can't put an old head on a young man's shoulders. I
yes,
had to learn the hard way, through my own experience, through going through it. And so, yeah, there was definitely all of that escapism, just wanting to be in fantasy world, really living. I used to get obsessed with people as well. Like before I met
yes,
Mark, my husband, I used to fixate on people
mm,
that I thought, had what I wanted, or that I thought I wanted to be. And I'd fixate on them to the point where I would be thinking about them all the time, and like going into fantasy about like how it could be with us. And I never was a stalker or anything like that. However, I have attracted two stalkers in my life, like full on stalkers, which we can go into another time. But I suppose really I maybe attracted them because there was that potential that could have been a timeline that I experienced. But I was
yeah,
always it always ended up in rejection for me. So the I would always find myself being rejected by the external other because I was just looking for love from the wrong place. I was thinking that it was like someone was going to become my knight in shining armor, that they were going to rescue me, that they were going to help me to, become who I wanted to become. And of course, I just completely got disappointed with everybody that came into my life. They were just like, no one was living up to my expectations.
yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, when like the world really does reflect back to us the internal dialogue. Um, you know what I mean? Like like almost by putting yourself in those situations, there's a part of you that's kind of rejecting yourself, and then that's mirrored back to you through the rejection from the external. it's like, wow, tough lessons to learn. Like that pain of rejection, that rejection energy, and is like that's one of my core
Is it?
wounds. I totally feel that, brother, and such a tough road to walk when you're facing off with that. And did you find, because rejection and abandonment was coming at you, oftentimes the rejected becomes the rejecter, right? Not always, but sometimes it manifests. Did you find that you could also, have that rejection pattern towards others who were,
Oh yeah, yeah.
infatuated?
Yeah,
Or
totally. Oh, 100%. That, yeah, of course. It's bound to play itself out. So I wouldn't give people a chance, so they did one thing wrong and they're dead to me. So, and I'd find it really easy and quite empowering to be able to
yeah.
do that to someone else as well. To be like, now you know how it feels.
It's just the human journey. It's fascinating. Like it's wild, right? Because we know the crushingness of that feeling, especially as a young person, and then yet we completely divorce from that when when we're when we're in the deliverance of it to somebody
I
else.
know it's so funny, isn't it? Like, I can be so cruel, and but I don't do that anymore. But I did go through that phase as well. But I think I've always been really empathic as well. So I'd never really wanted to destroy anybody. I mean, there's people out there that
Yeah,
want to do that. I'm never like that. But yeah, if I didn't
yeah,
genuinely like someone and they got obsessed with me or whatever, I'd just be
yes,
like, just put them straight. But
yeah,
of course, a lot of the time I would attach to people that, I'd be flattered by their attachment to me, and then I'd probably give out the wrong signals. And that's possibly
yeah,
why the stalker things, sort of happened because,
yes,
I was being disingenuous. I wasn't being honest with myself and going, look, no, this doesn't feel right for me. I'd be going along with it because it was there and it was, giving me a bit of an ego boost or whatever it was.
yeah.
So, God knows what my life review is going to be like. It'll probably be both good and bad, because I know you have to end up feeling how you've made other people feel. So
Yeah.
there'll be a few cringe moments. There'll be a few buttock clenching moments on in my life review, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, I guess it's also it comes down to that, what are we still balancing from those from past life scenarios and situations as well. So I think a lot of the times where there's still that balancing aspect happening from previous incarnations. So
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If and it's only recently that I learned about the karma of the 16, because it is a karmic number. It's one of four karmic numbers, and the 16 is where you were selfish in love in a previous or parallel incarnation. So then you have to, it's not coming back to you as a punishment, but more of a lesson to be learned, like just a
yeah,
rebalancing. So I'm sure that's
yeah,
why the rejection stuff had to happen to me. And also
yes,
people that cheated on me, that had people that had affairs, and all of this sort of stuff as well, up until fortunately when I met my husband. So I think that, there was all of that even though it was uncomfortable, and all the unrequited love, which is like
yes,
the tortured artist. It's that
yes,
archetype that comes up with that.
yeah,
That I was learning about, when I was doing my film degree. I was
yes,
learning all about these archetypes, and I was just seeing myself reflected back in them all the time. And but I mean, the good news is there is light at the end of the tunnel with it all, because once you've been through it, and hopefully you don't have to go through it, to be able to get to the other
yeah,
side. But there is, when you start just going in and you just go, look, I am divine, and and you actually can say it with you know
yeah,
with conviction, and you can feel it,
yeah,
then it's
yes,
like the external need for other people's approval disappears completely. It's like, don't even care
yeah,
about that anymore.
yeah,
I don't want to be
yeah, yeah,
disliked, but of course, because I still want to be liked, but I don't need to be
yeah.
approved of because I accept myself now.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, because like the overwhelming desire for validation is still coming from like I don't feel worthy internally. So like stepping into that, divinity and the truth of who you are, you don't need to have,
Sorry.
you don't, you're totally fine. You don't need to have that desire for, please tell me I'm good, tell me I'm good. And then, how many times when you wanted to be validated as a young person, did you deflect the recognition or validation anyway, because there was still a part of us that is like wanting it, but still not accepting it. So, it's great to like when now in who you are, which is obviously completely different to who you were as a young person, but all part of the journey. Like now you can sit in your power and be authentic and have those boundaries that you were unable to hold then, and have that integrity that maybe you didn't even, connect with then. Or
Yeah.
so, yeah, just wanted to honor that. That's
Yeah, I guess you're right. And
uh,
it's funny because it's bringing up a memory, like as well now of I think where it maybe started from in this incarnation, although it probably goes back a lot further, but it's sort of manifested as quite a big one when I'm with my first love, which was a girl at school, and I because I was going through that rite of passage, and I genuinely did have like the love feeling for this girl, and she, sort of like I remember saying to her, I'd got really drunk on a few bottles of wine, and I'd plucked up the courage to say, "I love you," and then I was expecting her to say it back to me, and she went, "Oh well, I like you a lot." And I just remember feeling so devastated that it's like, "What do you mean you don't love me?" Do you know what I mean? It's like, why aren't you feeling what I'm feeling? I like you a
yeah,
lot, it's like, what does that even mean? So that rejection, was very imprinted, into
yeah,
that storyline for such a long time. God.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's, again, like the resonance and reflection, and just listening to what you're saying, and just having my body feels connected to my own experiences, which we're not going anywhere near today because it's not about me, is like just that celebration of the incredibleness of being human, right? And how we do have these resonance and reflections with people, that there's so much more, and we've never met. You're on the other side of the country, like we've had this is our second ever conversation, and I just love that element of this work, and the miracles, and the truth of resonance and vibration, and how we do. The world really is a mirror. It's just a beautiful mirror we can look into,
It
you
is,
know.
and I'm starting to believe now that we're all like it's the collective consciousness. I'm not only believing it, but I know it now. It's like I think that your
Yeah,
experience, your consciousness, and my consciousness are the same. We're just expressing it through a different, sort of physical body, and our own projections of our belief systems, and that's how we are differentiated. But I think that as we are evolving, the knowingness of the collective consciousness is going to become so much more prevalent, and
yeah,
that's when we'll start realizing that what you're doing to somebody else is actually you're doing it to yourself.
yeah,
It's crazy. So why would you do that to someone when it's actually that that is just you, but just in a different
yeah,
shell?
yeah, yeah. It changes everything, right? Like that's just a total shift in every action and reaction that you possibly have when you finally get to that recognition of, singular collective consciousness, which we're all tapped into, which is such a, like, the illusion of separation is so powerful, right? It's so powerful, and it's been kind of manipulated and really kind of leveraged against a lot of people. But I feel like that's really starting to dissolve in this new energy, dissolve in the new potential, dissolve in the shifting of consciousness, and I think as people shifting and healing and doing their work, like, so much more is going to come online through the morphic field and through divine, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. It's a very exciting time to be alive, I must say. And I know that we're here front line, like, lighthouses. I used to say we were like the initial charge in the but it's like, no, we're a lighthouse. We put our light out, and people who feel that come to us. So yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that. So, well, how would you have described yourself, you know, leaving school, young person, probably sometimes some of the most confusing times to be a human being is like when we all of a sudden step out of all of these years of education and then go, who am I now? What am I going to do? You obviously went off and did other studies. How would you have described yourself as that young Hayden?
So confused. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I remember when the career advice person, sort of sat everybody down. I left in fifth form, so I didn't go on to sixth form. And they said, "What do you want to do, Hayden?" And I said, "Oh, I think I want to be a pub landlord." Honestly, I hadn't got a clue because I used to spend loads of time in a pub. I'd be like, "Oh, I think I can imagine pulling a few pints, that's what I want to do." So, but then I decided I'd get a job actually, and our neighbour had a shipping company in Middlesbrough called Ordbrough and Collins, and I ended up being taken on there through nepotism, as the office junior. But everything was just a nightmare there, just this horrible stories of me being completely useless, and I was because I was not interested. So, I eventually got sacked, within about a year I was sacked from there. And I actually met a clairvoyant when I was 16 and she said, go and get back into education. And so I listened to her and I went to the Longlands College and I studied my BTEC National Diploma in Communication Media. And that was really the start
Yeah,
of me finding my feet in the media industry, because I
yeah,
graduated with a distinction from there and then I went on to the Kent Institute. So there was this when I realized very quickly that the corporate world wasn't right for me. And I went, no, I'm going to do the artist's journey.
yeah,
Everything started aligning for me, but there was that whole sense of disillusionment that came, after I joined live TV because it was the environment was too lovey, and I didn't feel like I fit into the media industry as well. Like, thank God when I think about what's going on in the, sort of mainstream media now, I'm glad that
yeah,
I didn't stay in it, you
yeah,
know.
yes,
But
yeah,
it was just like everything that I was being guided to do was good for the moment, but then it was being broken down. So I was so lost, Tim. Honestly, I was like I didn't really have a clue, and I got very depressed as well. But fortunately, like during that time, I had a friend called Deb who took me to a spiritualist church in Billingham, and I had no idea that I had these capabilities. But we used to do open circles, and there would be all like
yes,
women, all these old women and that, and they'd be channeling all this information, and then we were encouraged to speak about what we got. And so I was just like, oh, well, I'll just say what I'm seeing, and I remember there was this first time that I did it, and all this stuff just came out of my mouth about there was one of the ladies in the room that I was attracted to, and I could see her at school with this woman, this girl that looked just like her. And I still remember it really clearly. She was called Alice, and they were like mistaken for being sisters, even though they weren't even related. And I was telling this story to this woman, and then I stopped and I was like, I've just really embarrassed myself. And then she was just like, yes, that's my friend Alice, she was my best friend. And then they all started giving me a round of applause and I was like, how did I just do that, like what is it, what's just happened? And
yeah,
like then I knew
yeah,
that I was obviously, when I have faith in myself, that I am clairvoyant as well. But I,
yeah,
I just don't really like doing that clairvoyant stuff so much. It's not really my thing. I find it
yeah,
a bit tiring.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I feel like, we all have certain elements of that, whether how much we connect with or don't connect with it is personal, I guess. So that's an interesting way to kind of start to lean into the spirituality though as well, isn't it? Like when you kind of had that experience and went, oh, okay, this is kind of not what I was expecting. Did that then kind of like start to steer you in ways that were more in alignment? What kind of flowed on from there?
So, wow. I actually disengaged from that for a while. And then but I always had a deck of cards, but I would
Yeah,
I would tap into them every now and again. But I started using my oracle cards. I had the Karma music deck, and I used them so much that they were literally falling apart. Everybody got a reading from me, at work, outside of work, and I just loved doing it. So I started
Yeah.
really tapping into that. And then I freaked myself out at some point in my life. I remember going, no, I can't do this anymore because it was too much responsibility. And I felt like if I was giving people misinformation, that I was affecting their future timeline and didn't want that
Yep.
responsibility. So I literally threw my cards in the bin and
Wow.
stayed away from them for about 10 years until I left corporate actually in when I was in my early 40s, and that's when I started reading oracle cards and doing numerology in the Blue Buddha in Bustleton on a Saturday, waiting
Yeah.
for people to sort of show up. So it never fully went away, but I think I was more
Yeah.
responsible when I went back to it, and I was
Mm.
reading from a place of recognizing that words are very powerful and that they
Yeah.
can influence people.
Yeah. 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 I love that. So media, how long did you spend working in the media before you got into the corporate IT? And you said hospitality was in there, it's woven somewhere as well. Was that while you're at college, or is that in between bits?
Yeah, so I was just working in a pub when I was at uni, just at the end of the campus, just three nights a
Yes.
week because I wasn't like I was supporting myself. I had a grant, but it was nothing much. But like my parents weren't in a situation to help me ever, so I've always had to, sort of fend for myself. And so that the hospitality thing, has always sort of been there in that sense. But the media industry, I was only in it for 2 years in the end because I used to work at Canary Wharf, and it was when the Millennium Dome was being built and all of that. So, and I was living on £10,000 in London, which I was getting more and more behind. And even though I had a lovely
Mm.
apartment in Southgate with my friend Bev, who had graduated with me, I was starting to get more and more behind in paying my rent, and because of that, it was affecting my work. I was also just partying all the time, so I knew I had to leave. I had to leave London, and then the that's when I went to Australia. So because I told you I went back to the Middlesbrough. My parents were separating, and I ended up on a working holiday visa in Australia, and I was there for 18 months before obviously I got kicked out and went back to Durham. And then it was during that time in Durham that I started, and then I went off to obviously do the first choice holidays and flights as a holiday rep. Did that for 2 years. And then when Mark and I decided that we'd go back to the UK, that's when I started thinking, right, we're going to have to buy a house. So we both need to get a proper job. And so I tried to fit into the real world, and I was offered a job in an IT recruitment company in Milton Keynes called Veritas IT, and
Yes.
I knew nothing about IT. I knew nothing about recruitment, and I nearly got sacked within the first 3 months because I hadn't done a deal. And then I think on the last day, I managed to drop a big deal in, and I was like, "Oh!" And they were like, "Oh, that's great, Hayden," And then like 15 years later, after having my own recruitment company and then becoming a business manager, that's when I eventually walked away from it. But that was the security blanket that was the building phase, that sort of
Yes.
making money, building houses, building security. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I needed that red base structure so that I could
Yeah.
springboard off of that. And because I didn't have anybody giving me handouts along the way, it's like it was
Yeah.
either up to me or it wasn't going to happen. And of course, Mark has always been really supportive financially as well as emotionally. But I had to get to a certain point where I felt like I was safe enough to be able to experiment again. And yeah, so each phase of doing all these different things I found really useful when I look back at it in hindsight, because if I
Yeah.
hadn't done the media stuff, I wouldn't know how to do my YouTube stuff now. Like I know how to edit, I know how to film. I mean, I know I was saying to you earlier that I don't know much about technology. I know enough, but
Yes.
I'm not a guru with it. but everything you do, I find it almost like adds to, the jigsaw of skills that you need to be able to get through the next phase and, take yourself to where you need to get to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's all extrapolating into like a, a jigsaw puzzle is like an interesting way to look at it, because when you're starting, there's just pieces and it's confusing. You're not really sure how it all fits together.
Mm,
And then you get to a certain level and you're like, oh, okay, now I can draw on this, I can draw on this, oh, this is becoming clear. And then it keeps extrapolating, right? We're not young, but we're not old, and we're still coming into our prime, really, and when it comes to, career and potential wisdom and all the things. So there's still so much more of your journey to come, and how that's going to still be drawn on all of the different threads is awesome. So when did you, when and how did you fully surrender to your purpose in this realm of, divine work or spiritual work, whatever you want to call it,
fully surrender.
starseed work?
Yeah, when I fully surrendered into it was when I left IT recruitment. I made a decision then that I was going to do something that I loved and that the rest would follow. And I wanted to
Yeah.
test the theory, because everyone had been telling me that. And you see it online, all the rest of it. And I'm just like, okay then, well, I'm gonna test this theory, see if it really works. And I was like, I'm
Yes.
doing this and I'm just going to do something that I love every single day, even if it's not
Yeah.
generating any income initially. I don't care. I'm just going to keep building and I'm just going to every day put 100% effort in. So the Dreamtime Academy was literally born when I moved down to the southwest. So we moved from Perth. We bought a lovely display home in Mandurah. And then we thought that was our
Yes.
forever home. And we sold that to go and reinvent ourselves. So we rented a house down there for 4 years. And during that period, my client base went through the roof. Like there was people traipsing through our house every day that wanting readings from me. And
Yes.
I wasn't really doing the online stuff back then, but then I realized, that I needed to reach a global
Yes.
audience. So it started growing and growing and growing, and I just was putting up like a lot more effort into my own business that I was doing for even when I was working in corporate. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, so this is energy that's good, even if it's not giving me any returns initially. But I always found that I had enough, but it became to a point where I was actually feeling like more prosperous than I was when I was making $250,000 a year, with my corporate salary and all those bonuses that I used to get. And I was like, well, how
Yes.
is this even possible? Because I was spending everything that I was earning because I was miserable. So we were going on ridiculous holidays, to Marina Bay Sands in Singapore and going around, staying in all these luxury hotels and everything. But I had never had any disposable income. Whereas now
Yeah.
I'm so satisfied with what I do that I don't feel the need to, we still have nice holidays, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel the need to be, always like, like spending money and all of that. So the courses were built, the portal was built, the book was eventually written. That took me 8 years. The cards then came, and then I had the color
Yes.
mirrors, where I became a teacher of the color mirrors practitioner, became a Reiki master and taught 18 Reiki
Yeah.
masters during that time as well, and
Oh,
20 color mirrors practitioners as well. So it's just been a lot of helping people to level up. And yeah, so I like, it's funny because when you look back at it, you go, well, how's that? How have I managed to do all of that? But it's sort of just happened because I was putting like 100% effort in every day, probably working 8 in the morning until 6 at night, and even weekends sometimes as well. So, for
yes.
people that are watching it, this sort of stuff doesn't come easy. You've got to put in the hard yards, but you've got to, just trust that, that you'll be looked after. And I feel like you are if you remember to ask your spiritual team for help and support. Like every day when I go walking the dogs, I say a little affirmation to the highest and brightest
Yeah.
angels and guides. So I name them all. And then I will be like, can you help me to generate at least, and then I put an amount in, either that or something better by, by the end
Yes.
of the day, and then thank you because it's helping me to continue doing my work. And then at the end of every day, I'm always like, well, how's that even happened? It's like I've always got that or more. And so it's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's easy now. All I have to do is ask and then do a little visualization of it sort of landing into my PayPal or whatever it is.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then you feel like you're almost working, with conscious creation and like manipulating reality in some kind of way by just setting
Yeah.
intentions.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, and yeah, it really resonates with a lot of like what Joe Dispenza talks about, like people like Billy Carson, like a lot of these like world leaders in in quantum field, and stepping into that future vision as opposed to cause and effect. Yeah, I love that, and wow, that's amazing, and like the trust piece is critical. I think it's the thing that most people they really, really, really struggle with taking that leap of faith, right? The corporate job or the toxic relationship that is serving financially but is kind of distorting your soul and it's so easy to hang on,
Yeah.
right? But to the leaps of faith are critical
Yeah.
to step into, ideally. And when you're what you're saying, like when you're on that purpose driven work, like, how different does it feel?
Oh my God, so much different. It's like it's going from feeling frazzled and out of alignment to feeling free. And for me, freedom is probably the most important thing that I want to feel in this life. Andromedan starseeds, I always keep referring back to my Andromedan galactic origins because they are the nomads of the universe. They're the freedom seekers, and we are still on this nomadic journey, Mark. Like we're not settled in Australia. I mean, we've been here 17 years, but we're talking now of moving across to Europe again and spending the next phase of our
Yes.
journey over there. And it's freedom that it gives me because it gives me space to be able to work wherever I want in the world. I'm not limited because it's everything that I'm doing is kind of cerebral. It's all online. And because the
Yes.
platforms are built and, like most of my clients in America anyway. So it's no big it's no big thing. And that sense of feeling free, like nobody's telling me I have to be at work at 9 o'clock in the morning, I have to leave at 5 o'clock at night. That, even if I want to have a day off, if I'm like when I was a recruiter, I was the top recruiter in the whole company, right? I was $1 million recruiter, and I'd ask for a day
Yeah.
off on a Friday. Can I go from maybe working 5 days a week to 4 days a week? Even just because it was already I had a contract book, so it was generating income anyway. No, you can't do that. We still want you here, and I'm like, but this doesn't make any sense, because like I could be that like
Yeah.
spending that day like recuperating or and I was living in
Yeah.
Mandurah and commuting an hour and a half into Perth every day, and that happened for 5 years when we first got here, and I was exhausted. So they weren't even bothered about me being burnt out, because if I'd burned myself out, then they wouldn't have been getting that income. So,
Right.
there was no give or take. So I need I need to be the controller of my own destiny. And
Yeah.
so freedom is absolutely the most important emotion that I want to feel, but also that I do feel now.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And so we've talked about all the different industries, which I love, and all the stepping stones through all the elements to 15 years in IT recruitment. I can only imagine what that was like. I mean, how much the IT industry is constantly evolving, like alone, let alone trying to, constantly shifting, changing, stressful, now, need this, fill this. Ah,
It
good
was
on you. You've still got
target,
hands. Well
target,
done.
target, target all the time. And then they
Yeah.
want, you're only ever as good as your last month. I still have nightmares
Yeah.
about it, Tim. Like I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm recruiting, but I'm recruiting in a different timeline, in a different dimension. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going, how the hell, why am I back in this, doing this again? It's like, what's going on? But it is like PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's wild, isn't it? It's like it's amazing how it comes back through your dreams. It's
Mm.
yeah, I totally get that. So the major turning points, like the major turning points for you, what were the keys? Kind of give me age and give me circumstances like those key moments.
So it would have been, I think there's three turning major pivotal moments. Was meeting Mark, because that's when I felt like I finally had someone to rely on, that was there to support me, and I could start seeing a purpose of moving forward with somebody that I genuinely cared about. So it took me out of
Yeah,
individuality and ego and feeling lost to feeling like I'd found my home. And so that changed everything. The my Andromedan awakening as well, when I was told that I was, sort of from Andromeda in the middle of the night, that changed the mission. I understood what my mission was from there, whereas before I was a bit unclear about how I was actually supposed to be delivering all of this information. And probably as well, when I went to Australia for the first time and my whole world had fallen apart with my mum and dad separating, even though I was 27, it still affected me like I was a kid, because I always knew that they were
yes,
going to do it, because my mum had told me that they were staying together because of me and my sister. So I always knew it was coming.
yes,
But when it actually happened, it was like, well, where am I supposed to be in the world now? Because my dad was in
mm,
the UK, my mum was in Australia. I
yeah,
had nothing and no one, and I'd literally just left London in an industry that I'd trained all those years for. And I was like,
yeah,
well, so I was homeless in Sydney. I'd left Perth to go and had an interview with Endemol Shine Television, because I'd developed a concept for a new game show called Seven Wonders,
yes,
which took contestants around the world. It was a bit like, Beast Games, that sort of, whittled down competition, but I was a bit ahead of my time. Endemol Shine
yeah,
didn't like the concept, and so I found myself homeless actually. But I have some friends that I'd reconnected with from live TV in Darling Harbour had suddenly become homeless, and the place that I was crashing at was no longer there, and I had no money because I'd gone across there hoping I was going to get a job, and I found myself homeless in Sydney for only 3 nights, fortunately. But I was in Darling Harbour, and I had my oracle cards with me, actually, the Karma music, and there was this
yes,
really big gust of wind, and the cards blew, like they were in the pocket, I think, of my rucksack, and they blew out of the rucksack and they was scattered through the harbour, and I went running to try and collect them all, because that's how I was making a bit of cash on the side. And I think I managed to get all of them, apart from the Grand Master was missing. There was one card that was missing, but I found out later on the meaning of all of that. But I was so lost, and the during that time I was still like, I was kind of keeping warm by going to nightclubs and staying, like, so I would blag my way into nightclubs, and there would be this one that was called Home in Sydney at that time. It was called Home Nightclub. And I remember that it was getting dark and I couldn't find where this nightclub was, and I saw this girl walking up this staircase going across the bridge in Darling Harbour, and I sort of stopped her and I said, "Oh, do you know where home is?" And she looked round to me and she said, she was crying, and she says, "Oh, I don't know where home is." She goes, and I said, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "Oh, because my mum has just committed suicide, and she jumped off the gap. There's this place in Sydney where there's a bit like a rock where people kill themselves." And then
yes,
her mother had done that as well. So her mum and her granny had both done it. She said, "I'm scared I'm going to do the same thing." And I was like, "Don't do that." And I was like, we ended up talking like all night long on the bridge, and I knew something was happening, because she was an angel. She was like an earth angel, and she made me realize that even though I thought my situation was really desperate, that there are other people out there that have got a lot bigger issues to deal with. And
yeah,
something about that meeting with her made me reset, and it was like, things can't get any worse than they are now. I knew I'd overstayed my visa. I had no money. I was
Yes.
homeless. We were asleep on the monorail, just going round and round and round in circles and getting kicked off it by the train guards and stuff. And I think I had 12 bucks left in my wallet. And the next morning I bought me and her breakfast at McDonald's, and then she went her way and
Yeah.
I went mine. And then I obviously never saw her again. But it was just moments like that, I think, where you're at rock bottom and you think that that's it, that you just don't know how you're ever going to pick yourself up. And there was a couple of other things that had happened as well, which sort of I don't want to talk about, that were really awful as well. And then at those times, you sort of make decisions, I think, that that no one's gonna rescue you. No one's gonna, and no one's ever really been there for me at those awful times, apart from strangers or what I call earth
Yeah.
angels. So
Yeah.
there would be the three major turning points.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a wow. It's such an intense feeling to be up against it and to know that apart from the universe, no human being in your field right now has really got your back.
It was a shocking realization, to be fair. I mean, I knew I had a return ticket to Perth, but I didn't want to use, so I could have gone back. But you see, my mum had just got remarried to a guy from Queensland, and they were kind of in that honeymoon phase, so I didn't feel like I even
Yeah.
had the base there. And I
Yeah.
was living for a while in a converted ice cream parlor on the outskirts of Sydney with some lovely Maoris that had taken me in, Maori footy players, believe it or not, and they'd allowed me to sleep in their lounge on a Z bed, and I was sleeping in a Tarago as well. And because I had a job, I was working for Optus, helping people upgrade their analog signal to digital, and I was doing all right, but I just knew I couldn't do it for very long because I was actually working illegally. So yeah, but there was no one really there, that and I remember even like turning to my dad, and at one point, and I sort of said, can you help? And he was, oh no, son, no, I've got no money, and I was like, what? It's like, oh my God, there's like, and I felt awful asking, and I've always had this thing about like asking for anything off my dad or my mum because
Yeah.
I just don't want to ever be a burden. So I think that's what's
Yeah.
made me, sort of strive even harder. But that, yeah, even like,
Yes.
but in those times where I actually genuinely did need, because I couldn't even eat. And I got excited about
Yeah.
eating mashed potato and gravy when my friend Gemma bought me $2 worth of like mashed potato. And I was like, couldn't believe how elated I was because, I could eat some.
Yeah. 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 The rock bottoms are the kind of the rock bottoms. They're there for a reason, but then there's always a way through, right? There's
Mm,
always these earth angels or still some kind of synchronicity or, as much as you would have been an earth angel for her, that girl that you spoke to and spent the night with, I just love that there's still we're part of something bigger, and it does have us. It is protecting us, even though sometimes we're not aware of it.
yeah, I believe that. I really do believe that, Tim. I
Yeah.
think that you're never really alone, but you've got to notice it as well because it might be staring you in the face and you might not see it.
Yeah. 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 100%. And I think, even having those reference points, and I love you sharing that, because I think those reference points, I talk about, how do we turn our pain into purpose, the choice points that come from the lows, almost like the lower we go, the higher we can kind of transcend from that experience. And so I feel like it's a really a powerful part of the human experience, right? We can relate to people who are on the street, we can relate to people who've lost people, or whatever that experience gives us a capacity for. It's something that is a gift. And if we lean into the blessing of it and beyond the stressing of it, then it serves not just us but the other people that we connect with. They're having their own version of that. So yeah, wow. So leaning forward, we've leaned back. We've talked about now like looking into the future for Hayden? And obviously, you mentioned, you're not necessarily, deeply rooted in Australia. You might be considering, other ventures. What's the future vision, as much for, your journey in the world, but also what you're doing with your business as well?
It's funny because like I've never really had a business plan, and because my husband Mark, he's like, "Oh, when I first started, make a business plan," and I did one, and none of the stuff that I put on it came true. So like I can't really work it out. I'm just sort of guided now to sort of see what comes
Yeah.
up. I mean, obviously, I want to continue helping and being of service, and feeling like, that I'm building a community. So the Oversoul Codex
Yeah.
Collective is a big focus for me at the moment because I want my group to expand, so that it's just getting, sort of more people that can connect up with the group for everybody's sake, really, because I want to sort of bring in guest speakers and things like that, eventually to help bring in new information and so people can start learning more. So I think the
Yes.
membership portal is going to be something that I want to focus on. I'm not sure about retreats, maybe, maybe not. We've had
Mhm.
talks about potential collabs, but definitely doing more online stuff, keeping going with the podcasting, both
Yes.
of the podcasts. I really do want to focus a lot on that for mainly for my own personal growth because I am learning so
Yeah.
much from the people that I'm connecting with, and that brings me
Yes.
joy. So I'm kind of looking
Yeah.
at releasing a lot of the hustle mode because I have been doing a lot of lives on
Yeah.
TikTok, and that's where a lot of people get like free readings with me, where I do like their
Yes.
birth chart, and it's exhausting, because I do it every single day for sometimes up to a couple of hours, and sometimes I just don't want to do it
Yes.
because it's like I feel like a performing parrot, and so
Yeah.
less of the stuff that feels like hustle and more of the stuff that
Mm,
just feels in flow and in alignment, and that I'm genuinely
yeah.
coming from a space of being present instead of,
Yes.
doing it to try and generate something.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you say that, and yeah, I was talking to Matt Omo, he taught me breath work and sound healing originally, and one thing, a distinction he brought forward was, moving from performance to presence. And like you literally just sum that up in your own way, and I find that like very powerful. Like both his words and your words have struck me. Like when we're in that space of presence, the authenticity flows naturally. It's just there. Whether it's goosebumps or people feel it in their hearts, and when there's an element of performance, which is like you know we all do it in our own ways at certain times. It just lands differently, and even the reactions to posts and things that you put up are distinctly different when you're in presence versus performance. So, yeah, I really I love that, and like living in that presence and delivering that more and more in your business is where that sense of just deep purpose falls out of, doesn't it?
Yeah, I really believe that. And it's funny because sometimes, like, I don't even think I've realized that I've been doing it for such a long time. One thing that happened when we went off on our last trip, we went to France and to Aude, and I didn't lose my suitcase, but my suitcase didn't turn up when we got there.
Yes.
And I was at Toulouse airport, and Mark's came through, and I was like, "Where's mine?" And we were about to jump on this cruise, around the Med after our time in France. And I was like, oh no, all my posh clothes are in there. I'm going to look like a right scallywag because I've only got like a couple of things in my rucksack. So anyway, so it didn't turn up. But then I started reflecting on what that meant, and it really is about
Yeah.
what can you bring forward with you into the new earth that you need and what are part of your identity, because your clothes really represent who you are, your identity, but also who you have been as well. So this
Yeah.
whole thing of identity started coming up for me that I didn't really get for ages. And then when we flew
Yeah.
back to Perth, Mark's suitcase arrived, but mine didn't. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was 10 weeks later that I got it. So twice in one trip, this bloody suitcase. like,
Ah,
what is this about? And now it's only really now, sort of even a couple of months down the track that I'm starting to fully understand what that message was really all about, because I probably wasn't
yeah,
ready to really fully
yes,
like integrate it or to let go.
yes,
And I sort of know what it's like aligning with, like with what do we take forward when we eventually do move back to Europe from everything that we've built here. And it's all just stuff,
yeah,
it's all just stuff, but
yeah,
you sort of go,
yeah,
do you need to take that stuff with you? Or do you, is this just holding you back? Is it just dense 3D stuff, materialistic nonsense? Or, because I like a nice some sofa to sit on, but
yeah,
you sort of have to question it all, really, don't you now? And I think
yeah,
we're not the
yeah,
same. We're not such dense carbon-based beings anymore like we used to be. We're more fluid and flowing
yeah,
and free flowing and organic and multidimensional, and we have to learn to
yes,
sort of slip in between those dimensional aspects, I think. And that's, I
yes,
think people are trying to work out what that looks like right now, aren't they?
yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think it's different for all of us. I know for us, like we've really for want of a better word, is like just shed. Like we don't buy things for ourselves very much. Like we don't even really go out and dine in restaurants much anymore, just because what we make for ourselves is actually usually better. It's more wholesome. It's on every level it makes more sense. But I've found like once your energy and your heart is full, as you were saying earlier, you don't need to fill your space with the validations and the items and the time wasting things, and like it's filling a void. All it's doing is filling a void. When you fill the void with love or belief or your own truth and your own purpose, then why would you don't need that stuff. It's like you start to get rid of it. It's like let it go. Like I sold so much. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, and I think that's indicative of walking a path of divine service as well. I don't think Yeshua or Buddha or any of the masters were carrying like a huge caravan of all an entourage with like all of the things.
I don't think they were. I definitely don't think they were. They wouldn't have been bothered about their IKEA flat pack rubbish.
That's right. Oh dear. I love that. And, I just also wanted to honor a part of this conversation, which is around the love that you've experienced with Mark. And, I'd love you to, how long have you actually been together now? Like,
24 years, I think. 24. We met in 2001. So, I met Mark when I was at my, probably my lowest ebb. So it was divine timing, absolutely, because God knows what would have
yeah,
happened. So yeah, I feel really blessed that we've been able to travel this path together, because there's been some big shifts. We've moved to Australia, we've moved from Spain, because we met in Madeira, then we lived in Spain together in
yes,
Alarin well, I was there for a year before we eventually moved back to the UK to get on the housing ladder. And then we did all those years in the UK before eventually being able to come over to Australia, because when we first applied, we couldn't even we couldn't even come because the rules weren't didn't allow de facto gay relationships into Australia. So we actually had to wait until the law had changed before it was even a possibility. And it was always my dream, it was never really Mark's dream until he'd been there. And then all of a sudden I could see how much he loved it as well. And everything just fell into alignment. Like neither of us felt like we've had to compromise. We've both always had our own independence within a relationship. Like he's got his own thing going on.
yeah,
He's been in travel and tourism all his life. And, I honor that with him. I never try and like change him or stop him from doing anything he wants to do, and vice versa. But we
yeah,
do still feel, probably a bit like you and Elise, that we like being together. So for the
yeah,
outsider looking in, they might think, oh, well, they're codependent. We've got our dogs and,
mm,
we like eating at home and doing all that sort of stuff. But we don't see it like that. We see it as being mostly interdependent because we both contribute equally to the dynamic. We understand each
Yes.
other 100%, and we're not like, we know we don't possess each other, like you're not mine, right, and vice versa. But we're just traveling this path together. And I think if we'd met at any other point earlier to when we did, like I was 30 when I met Mark and he was 31. And if we'd met any earlier, I don't think that we would have necessarily been able to sort of recognize or see each other as for who we are. So everything is
Yes.
divinely ordained. And I think that as long as you remember that, that you've got to just remember that everything changes, and but as long as your core values stay aligned and that you both want the same thing, you've got to understand that people
Yes.
will evolve, and sometimes that might feel a little bit uncomfortable temporarily, and then one of you might evolve quicker than the other for a while, and then vice versa. But all of that is
Yes.
just, you've got to do the hard yards. You just got to stick at it. And I actually do feel really genuinely delighted that our relationship has lasted so long, because I know that the gay community can be quite volatile, especially now with things like Grinder and all of that. People
Yeah.
just don't know what it means to commit to somebody. And I'm just glad that we
Yes.
never had Grinder, like, because I mean, I've never even downloaded the app. I wouldn't ever want to, but like,
No.
it's like I
Yeah.
feel for those people that that's how they're meeting people now. Like I feel blessed that I can say, well, I met Mark in Madeira, and it
Yeah.
feels like romantic and not like, oh, we did a Grinder hookup, and then it was like,
Yeah.
because it just must be awful for them.
It's not really the same. And yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I love it's interesting, like, even meeting him at 30, like obviously on the other side of your Saturn return, which is probably a really good time to meet somebody, not prior to, so generally or during. And 24 years is an incredible testimony to, obviously your love for each other and the journey together. Like that's a very, very long-term relationship in the modern era. And incredible, like as you say, in the community that is, it can be very challenging for people to have that level of commitment. So just a huge, just, yeah, just honoring of that, just deep honoring of that. So,
Cute.
you know, yeah, I'll just really see you and see that. And yeah, and the deep soul contract, right? The deep soul contract that is, is that that's what's being honored. You are both honoring that. And yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing everything that you've shared. It's been a really fascinating through your life. And I feel like, I really resonate with so much of what you're doing, even though there's obviously correlations between what we do, but you've got your own uniqueness, we've got our own uniqueness. But, it's just so heartening and beautiful to talk to people who are committed to this work and are doing it full time and are leaning into it. And, it is purpose driven work. It's to make a difference in the world as much as it is to make a difference in our world. And, the Oversoul Codex sounds amazing. And, creating that community and the work that you do there, is has its own legacy element, right? It has its own legacy energy because especially when you're helping people in that energy to take on transformation and shift when a lot of people especially and my age, your age, older, they're not, if they don't change, they're gonna go home with a whole lot of stuff to come back and work on in the next life. So it's so beautiful to know that we can teach old dogs new tricks.
Yeah, and again, that can be it can be quite disillusioning as well, though, because when you see people not committing to their wellness journey or their soul evolution, then it I do go through those times where I go, difference am I making? And I've just got, I think I keep on having to bring it back to the small wins and, the people
Yeah.
that I have been able to, genuinely sort of guide through moments of difficulty into moments where they
Yeah.
feel they can breathe again. And it's not my responsibility. All I can do is
Yes.
provide the guidance and the tools and the support, etc. So, and it being okay with all of that, and that's been quite difficult for me to sort of learn because I believe as well that I might be traveling a bodhisattva life incarnation, that I won't ascend until everybody has ascended as well. So there is that sort of sense of, oh my God, if you don't, then I'm going to have to keep coming back to the earth plane, as in loads of different forms. It's like, how many times do I have to come back if I have to wait for everybody to ascend? Oh my God, that's billions of lives potentially, isn't it?
Dear, yeah. No, and it's like I totally hear you, like, and a saying that like I used to say a lot is like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't necessarily make it drink. Sometimes you can try and drown it to make it drink, but it's probably what I used to do a bit too much. But people have their own journey, right? We always have these choice points, and you can give the most divine guidance and like you know do a session with somebody where it's so clear, like it's incredible, and they're just not ready. They're not at that choice point. They're not in that energy yet, and that's their journey.
That's it. You just have to let it go, and then just focus on something else that makes you feel good, and not, yeah, don't
Yeah.
let it disillusion the work that you do and everything.
Yeah.
I must admit, one of the
Yeah.
best things that I love about this work, though, is when somebody comes back and they write something and they say, "Thank you so much. What you said, what happened. And sometimes it's years down the track, but
Yes.
they're those moments that keep me really motivated because, again, it's not about quantity, it's about quality, and it's
Yeah.
about if you make a difference, even if it's just in one person's life, then you feel,
Yes.
I would have felt like it's been worth it. I really mean that
Yes.
because, like, I don't particularly like people, but I do love humanity. And
Yes.
that's where I come from. Sometimes I wonder, why? Because, like, I don't like a lot of the time, I don't like human behavior. I don't really
Yeah.
connect with the human part of this experience, but
Yes.
I genuinely love humanity at a soul level. I know that we are, divine love. I know that that's who we are. So of course, I want to assist the remembrance of that. Of course I do. Like, who wouldn't?
Yeah. 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 100%, and I agree 100% too. It's a numbers game, but it's a divine numbers game. It's not the human numbers game that we get caught up in sometimes, and like sometimes that one person or that one experience or that event where there was only a couple of people there is divinely led and divinely purposeful, and you get humbled and reminded of that sometimes because yeah, it's not always about big rooms and big things. Sometimes it's just that one thing that changes that person's life and changes who knows how many timelines, of theirs and the loved ones around them. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you, Hayden. Thank you so much for sharing openly and vulnerably, and yeah, I look forward to connecting again with you and seeing your journey and being a part of it and sharing it. And is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap it all up?
Just to you as well, Tim, the same straight back at you. I've heard your story, obviously not as in detail as because I didn't ask as intense questions, but I will do. Like, I'll definitely get, if you'd like you and Elise to come back onto Cosmic Conversations in the future, that would be amazing because, I think it's lovely what you're doing, and I know what you've been through, some of it. So it's not been easy for you as well, and for you to commit to keeping on, and doing this work, it's commendable as well. So whatever you've said to me,
Thank
it's
you.
straight back at you. Really, I see you as well, and I see what you're doing, and just know that that it's valued, not just from me, but from everybody that is is watching this, or your spiritual team, like they are
Yeah.
proud of you. You're genuinely proud that you've taken up the gauntlet and you're running with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And I graciously accept that reflection and yeah, and pour it back to each other with love. So it would love to chat to you again. And yeah, when the time is right, we will get there. But thank you, Hayden. Dreemtime Academy, we're going to put all the links to all the wonderful things you're doing into so people can find you. And until next time, my friend, thank you again. Thank you so much.
Again.
Well, here's our little Marvel moment right at the end. If you've gotten this far, if you've watched through all of the intros and the speaking and the outros, well, this is our little Marvel moment. And this is who we're going to be having next week. So if you miss that, who knows what might not shift in your reality.